Hey everyone, my name's Dom, welcome back to the channel. Today it's time for another book review and I'm going to be talking about The Bone Chips by R.J. Barker. So The Bone Chips is book one in the Tide Child Trilogy, and this was one of my February buddy reads with my friend Nina, and we were joined on this one by Odin, who's another friend from the Oasis Discord. At the same time, my good friend Megan from Megan's Reading Revelations was reading this book as her Patreon pick for February, so I was joined by a really nice group of people who were all reading this at the same time, and I like being able to do that and kind of bat ideas and thoughts off each other as we're reading. So straight off the bat, I'm going to say that I thought this was quite an odd book, and because of that, I'm going to do kind of an odd review in terms of the way I normally look at reviewing books anyway, because I feel that some of the things that I'm going to say in this review might give a wrong impression as to my overall thoughts and feelings on the book. So I'm going to take the unusual step of starting off with my 5-star rating, the weighted ratings with a bit more detail and a bit more of an in-depth look at different aspects of the book will be at the end of the video as usual, but I'm going to start off with my 5-star rating. So this one I gave 4 out of 5 stars because I did overall enjoy my experience with The Bone Chips. There's some really interesting plot points, some really interesting characters, and I will definitely be looking at continuing this series, especially because I've heard some really good things about book 3, The Bone Chips Wake, the final book in this trilogy. What I'm not sure about is how long it'll take me to get to book 2 and then to book 3 in this series. When we were discussing the buddy read and kind of setting it up, Nina and I were talking about if we liked this book, we could do book 2 the next month and then book 3 after that and get it all out of the way in 3 months, which I would quite like to do to kind of run through the trilogy rather than have it just sitting there unfinished in the back of my mind for several months. But we haven't discussed that aspect of it since we both finished the book, so that's a conversation to be had another day. So I will admit that I came out of this book feeling a little bit worn down by it, and it's the first time that I've finished a book and felt that I need to use the term palate cleanser for the next read that I'm intending to go for. It did take me a while to get into the book, and I think that was one of the key aspects of it, but that was largely due to having a hectic work week and I was a little bit frazzled and just couldn't find the time to get a good run at the book. I found therefore that when I was able to get to the book, I didn't seem to be getting very far with it. The chapters are relatively long, so I think that's maybe a little bit misleading. When I was sitting down, I would read maybe 1 chapter, 2 chapters at a push, whereas normally I would expect to read in a good session several chapters in one go, and here I wasn't able to do that. But because the chapters are quite long compared to many of the other books that I've been reading recently, it was maybe, as I say, a little bit misleading, and I was maybe reading more than I thought I was because it just didn't seem to be going quickly by chapter count. So the book itself covers Tide Child, which when I was reading it I kept subconsciously amending it to The Tide Child, which was a little bit strange, and then my mind was going back and rereading again as it appears in the text, which is just Tide Child. So that was a bit off-putting randomly. I'm not quite sure why that was going on, but I just couldn't seem to train my mind to ignore it. But the Tide Child is a bone chip, and these are literally ships that are built using the bones of Arachesians, and these are kind of giant sea dragons that inhabit or used to inhabit this world. So where in the old days of our world the size of a ship might have been loosely designated by the number of masts, here it's by the number of ribs. So the Tide Child I think was a 4-ribber, which is quite a big ship, and I think the biggest one that I recall hearing about in the book is a 5-ribber. The ship itself though is a black ship, so you have white ships which make up kind of the official fleet of the Hundred Isles, and then you have these black ships which are ships of the condemned, also known as ships of the dead. And this is where criminals go if they don't go to kind of prison hulks instead. They go to the black ships and they're expected to stay there until they die, which because of the type of missions that the black ships go on and the type of warfare they get involved in, it's not really expected that someone will last that long once they do go onto a black ship. The main character in the book is Duron, who is the shipwife or captain of Tide Child for all of about 2 or 3 pages in the opening chapter of the book, where he has his kind of hat of command taken off him by Mias Gilbrin, also known as Lucky Mias. She's been condemned to the black ships, and instead of being kind of assigned to a particular ship, the impression really is that she's chosen her own ship and she's gone and taken command of it by force. She keeps Joran on as her deck keeper, which is basically the second in command of the ship. So the story, before all of its twists and turns and intricacies, sees Tide Child setting sail on a mission to chase down the sighting of an Arakesian, because the Kishans, which is kind of a ship talk for the Arakesians, they are thought to have been extinct. There's no more of them, and of course with no more Arakesians, there's no more Arakesian bones, and therefore you can't build any more bone ships. Obviously, therefore, whoever's able to find and kill this newly sighted Arakesian will have the upper hand in this war, because they will be able to build the bone ships which could literally turn the tide in the war between the 100 Islanders and the Gaunt Islanders. So most of the time in this book is spent at sea, and there's a real kind of mistrust between those who spend their lives at sea and those who are kind of landbound, the ones who don't spend their lives at sea. And it's quite nice to see those interactions when you've got people who step off ship and spend some time amongst the what we might call the landlubbers. There are also a number of decent sea battles here with some giant gallows bows, and I think it was really well done, really interesting to see the way that they actually conducted these battles and the way that it was written. And it's weird as well because, especially whilst you've got these battles going on, you've got lots of talk of these kind of shark-like creatures who make it really dangerous to be in the water yourself. So normally where you have these sea battles and you've got various people going overboard and maybe they're waiting to be rescued by rowboats at the end of the battle, here it's very different, and it's really weird to find that people on the ship, despite spending all their lives at sea, a lot of them cannot swim. And the reason for that is because of these sea creatures. It's not worth learning to swim, because if you go overboard, you are basically done for. You are fish food. So with the Tide Child being our primary setting, there's lots of opportunity to meet all the individual characters that make up the crew. And along with this, you also therefore get all of these different ranks that make up the crew of Tide Child, from the deck childer, which is everyone who can basically do their job competently on the ship. You've then got other ranks like the hat keep, the courser, the deck mother, the oar turner, and so on. There's also a gullane, which is kind of like it seems like it's a flightless and largely featherless talking bird-like creature. There's a couple of different names for these. I think Wind Talker is one, because these creatures have the ability to control the wind, and so they're basically kind of enslaved and used as, not really crew, but used as tools, if you like, on these ships to help them sail. The various crew members on their ship were all quite interesting, and their interactions, particularly with Joron as the main point of view character of this book, I thought were all really well done. Many of them are new, as they're kind of recruited to take part in this particular mission at the start of the book. We go along and we find various new members of crew to come on board and take the Tide Child to its full complement, and it's quite good to see those interactions and to see the relationships change over the course of the book as respect is earned and as actions unveil ulterior motives for various characters. Now, the world building, though, is where this book comes into its own. Although I don't think it's specifically mentioned anywhere, this is a world without trees to speak of, so there's no wood, and of course if there's no wood, there's no reason for the characters or the narrative to mention wood. So we go along learning of all of these other things that are used instead of wood to make all of these items. So everything that you would usually expect to find being made of wood, in this world it's made of something else. And the bone for shipbuilding is of course the primary kind of most standout example of this. You've also got Gion stalks and Varisk vines, and you've got fish skin and bird leather for clothing and things like that. So it's a really interesting world, and it's really good to see the different ideas, the different mindset that goes into creating a world where you've got one of the kind of primary taken for granted resources of our world not being available. What are you going to do? What are you going to use to replace that? Outside of the materials, I think the world is kind of discreetly quite a colourful place. You've got a very kind of off-the-cuff mention at the start of the book of pink sands. The Gion and the Varisk, I think, are pinks and purples as well. So the world itself, if you could see it, I think would be quite a boldly vibrant place to look at. Along with the crew of the ship and all of the flora and fauna of this world, there are a whole host of other new words to get your mind around. And although there's a glossary at the back of the book, it is primarily there for the ship terminology, or specifically the ranks of the various crew members of the ship. In that respect, I kept thinking of the old tagline of the movie Willow, which is "Forget everything you know or think you know," because in this book, it's just going to reinvent all of that for you anyway. So to stick with the ship as the example, because that is our kind of primary world within a world in this book, you've got no prow and stern, instead you've got the beak and the rump, although I'm not entirely sure whether the rump is specifically the kind of back end of a ship or whether it is the bridge, because you do get things like where the shipwife, the captain of the ship, hands over command for a short while, she or he will say, "The rump is yours," whereas you'll normally hear in our world or our terminology, "The bridge is yours," or "You've got the bridge." So that was a little bit weird and took a bit of time to get used to. You also, instead of port and starboard, you've got landward and seaward. There are no masts, instead we have spines, and we have wings instead of sails. So pretty much everything has been kind of reinvented to go along with the largely, I guess, the materials that we have in this particular world. Although that was really good and it was really inventive world building, that was, I think, probably the one thing that made it a little while before I was able to get into this book, because I was taking my time and processing these new words and what they mean and trying to commit them to memory, and basically trying to get my head around what seemed to be like a psychedelic fever dream of a world. So it was really, really interesting. It was really vibrant. It was really, really weird at the same time. Despite that though, the story and the characters and the raw kind of inventiveness of the world definitely did shine through though, and as I said at the start of the video, I gave the book 4 stars because I did enjoy it, even if it did take me that little while to get into and took me quite a lot longer than normal to get my head around all of this new terminology and try to find kind of which way was up and which way was down in this new world. So in terms of the weighted ratings, I decided therefore to give this 15 for the enjoyment, because it was definitely an enjoyable story. I had a good time reading it, although it was slow starting for me, and I wasn't 100% sure how much of that was because of external influences and how much reading time I was having to get into the book. The world, because of its inventiveness and because of the level of detail it went into, I thought that was really good, and I gave this 17 out of 20. The characters I gave 16 because there were some really interesting characters here, some really good interaction between them, and as I said earlier, I like the way that the relationships developed as the book went on. I thought it was really kind of natural and organic the way that happened, and I really appreciated the way that it was incorporated into the book. The plot I also gave 16 out of 20. It was maybe a little bit basic sounding in terms of the kind of broad scope of the plot, but there were various little subplots and lots of intricacies and twists and turns in there that definitely made it interesting, and that was one of the more enjoyable parts of the book for me. On to the writing style then, and this is where I marked it down a little bit because of some of those issues I was having with getting my head around all of these new words and the terminology and the way that people would refer to things that I knew, and the words were very, very close in some instances to what we would use in the same respect in our world, so it just took me out of the story slightly. I gave this 5 out of 10 because I just felt like sometimes it was a little bit too much. There were times in the book where I almost felt I was reading an updated nautical version of the Jabberwocky. So that was really quite a strange experience. The pacing I gave 3 out of 5. Overall it was nicely paced. There were a few of those slower moments where we're building the world at the start of the story, and as I said, it did take me a while to get into it, but I also mentioned that I'm not sure how much of that was external and how much of that was because of the book. So it's a difficult one to kind of properly judge, but I felt that the end of the book definitely made up for it, and it was a really nice pace once you got past a certain point, which was maybe kind of midway through the book. For the discretionary category, I've given 2 out of 5. I do quite like the cover, although it's possibly a little bit misleading. I suppose it depends on how you view these Arachesians, because they're not your typical dragon, which for me the front of the book tells me to expect. I do like a map, as regular viewers know, and there's a map in front of the book, although it was a little bit difficult whether I was reading on the Kindle or reading in the paperback copy. It was a little bit difficult to refer to the map and to kind of get details from it, because it was quite a small but detailed map overall. There were also various illustrations, chapter headings throughout the book, which again I quite liked, but it was maybe difficult to make out some of the details of them because of the artwork style and what it was that they were depicting, which was kind of in keeping with this world. It was all a little bit strange. It's not necessarily things that we would be used to in our world, but they definitely added a little bit of extra flavour to the book itself as I was reading it. Overall then, this gives the Bone Ships a score of 74%, which is a respectable score. It's not a bad one at all, especially where I've had a couple of categories where I've marked it down, maybe a little bit lower than you see me mark down some other books. The other categories definitely made up for that though, and I can definitely see the scope here for this being a really good series overall. In terms of a ranking then, that puts the Bone Ships at equal 46th position in my Hall of Fame. So there we go. As usual, if you've read this or if you're looking to read this, drop me some comments down below and let me know your thoughts as well. Hit the like and subscribe buttons as always. Check out social media and support me links in the description box below. I'll hopefully catch you again soon, but as always, take care of yourselves, read some good books. Bye for now.